This week on Lemon's Car Spotting.
Hey, it is Nick and Eric. This is Lemon's Car Spotting. Without further ado, what have you guys found on the street?
Oh man.
Cloud
This
car.
The late 90s driver's ed machine right here. The Plymouth Breeze. Of course, the one of the three cloud cars with the Stratus and the Cirrus.
Cirrus, yeah.
Cirrus, yeah. Man, kind of just the most forgettable car of the 90s, maybe. Probably in that discussion, at least.
It's in the conversation. You know what I realized when I saw this? Like, oh yeah, cloud car. Breeze is not a cloud.
Right.
And I feel like they wanted to, because obviously you don't make a Stratus and a Cirrus without having that theme in your mind.
Right.
And then they said, oh yeah, and Breeze. And then they didn't realize until they made them, like, hey, wait a minute, that's not a cloud. What were we doing again? Crap.
Ooh, oops. Man, I just noticed how tall the butt is on this thing relative to
it's
the
got
rest
a,
of the
as
car.
Sinbad would say, it's got a high booty. My only, I mean, I know nothing about these. I mean, I will say there was that, was it a spec series or did they just, there was a factory supported car that ran in some sedan series of the time that was a Stratus that made the Stratus look pretty cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Breeze, I mean, what the, like, the one thing I do remember, so I went to a Catholic high school and the priests that worked and lived at the school they had a car that was like shared amongst them, and it was a Plymouth Breeze.
Yep, that sounds right.
And I remember talking to Father Huber about his Plymouth Breeze. He knew I was into cars. And he says, well, you know, we've got a Plymouth Breeze and it's a pretty good car. And at the time it was brand new. So, you know, I probably said, yeah, that seems okay. I don't know.
The Stratus was built to Touring 2000 specs, which is British touring car spec. So it was built the same as, because they tried to make a U.S. touring car championship, and the only two cars in it were the Stratus and E36, maybe something like that.
I do remember that now. The USTCC.
Yeah. Somebody in the comments will remember what they raced against, but there was basically, it was an Accord, I think. So it was like they were built 2 liter, whatever. I don't want to digress too far, but I ran into the guys who built those cars for Dodge, and they were hilariously cheated, like to the most ridiculous degree, and had no resemblance whatsoever to the street car, if you can imagine. So
that's why they looked cool.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder if those cars still exist. How many did they build, and where are they, and do they still exist? In any case, your mission for Lemons is clear: is to make a Breeze USTCC. What would they have done if it was a Breeze? As I recall, the Stratus said Stratus in real big letters across the side. So you got to do the same thing with Breeze. And wasn't there? What was the Espresso? Was that a trim level on a Breeze? Could you get a Breeze Espresso? Not espresso, espresso. Could you get that? I feel like you could.
I think it was a thing. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Ah, man.
Oh, no.
Well, there's half of an R107 on the streets in Chicago. Even money bet on wheels removed intentionally or not.
It's got wheels. It's like falling into the earth.
Oh, the suspension is gone? How does that happen?
I think it's like falling into a sinkhole or something.
Yeah, well, that's possible. It could be.
Or it's got the famous Mercedes air suspension, which I don't know that these had. You know, the one that is flat after, 2 business minutes after the warranty expires. Like your airbag suspension will completely fail. That's the German car and Land Rover 101.
Yeah. I can't see. I have the brightness turned down a bit. I might adjust that, but it looks to me like they've got more modern wheels on it than
Well, this is a really late R107. Okay. You can tell because it's got the glue-on third brake light on the trunk lid. And I believe that these wheels or wheels like it were actually factory for these later ones, which were not good design-wise compared to the original. I mean, they had the big bumpers. They had a lot of these had the just really bad gold emblems, and it was just, it was of the time. It was like, it was 1989, and there were a lot of cars like that were like just being dressed up. They were from way earlier in the 80s, if not the 70s. I mean, the 928 I feel like arguably falls into that category, certainly the Countach, and they're just all kind of bloated at this point.
I'll be honest, I'm bad at Mercedes. It's the one thing I'm really bad at. So I don't know much about these. I know that people want them. They are collectible. This one, probably get for Lemon's money, I would guess.
Yeah, I don't know much about the R107 market. I mean, there definitely was a period where they hit that point where they were worth $2,500 and they needed $37,000 of repairs. And so a lot of them wound up just being abandoned. And like many German cars, I think the underlying V8 motor is really strong, but then everything around it just like, nickel and dimes you to death. And these were incredibly expensive when they were new. And I definitely, even by the 90s, these were, and maybe it was the earlier ones by that point that were starting to time out, but they were starting to become throwaway cars. But man, corrected for inflation, I feel like, were these $100,000 and they were new? They might have been. They were super expensive. Yeah. Well, still one out there that can be lemon-sized if you can get a crane or fix whatever's happening in the front. Maybe somebody stole, if it's not air suspension, maybe somebody just stole the coil springs and left it as is. Be an unusual crime. All right. Oh, dude, it's a Capri.
Yep.
Well, this was Mercury's answer to the Miata question mark. It was, or was it, did it predate the Miata? It was right around the same time.
Yeah. 89, I think, was the first.
Yeah. So if it was an 89, the Miata came out in 89, but was a 90 model. So this might actually slightly predate the Miata. And all I remember this was when the Miata came out, my dad really, really wanted one and thought it was the coolest thing. And at the time I was 10 and my sister was 6, and my mom was concerned about having a car that you could put the kids in. And this has a tiny little back seat. Right. And I remember test driving both the Miata and the Mercury Capri. And my dad was like, I'm just going to wait, which he did. I got my driver's license, did not need to be shuttled around anymore. And like almost immediately after, my dad bought a used first-gen Miata, which he still has to this day. So, which I think was the right process for him.
I would say so, yeah. These, of course, built on the Mazda Familia chassis. Actually, this is a Ford Laser, which was built in Australia. So it was an Australian-built Ford sold by Mercury, but based on a Mazda.
Based on a Mazda 323, or a Familia, which we call the 323 here.
Yeah. So 323 Mazda MX-3, Ford Escort that came after this.
Right.
This car, I think I said MX-3. I feel like I'm forgetting one of the Mazdas, but yeah.
What other Mazda was based on this? Tell us in the comments.
But the interesting thing about it is the motor they used in this is extremely similar to the Miata motor, which was a front-wheel drive engine originally. Right. So 1.6 liter. And there's the turbocharged version in the XR2 Capri, which is really popular to put in, of all things, Ford Festivas. So that's how you tune up a Festiva. You put the Capri XR2 swap into it. But in general, great basis chassis, this is probably the worst of the cars ever built on.
Yeah. I mean, I knocked it compared to the Miata, which, Miata, the NA Miata is one of the great cars of all time. So it was sort of an unfair fight. But yeah, the underpinnings of this thing are not bad. And for Lemons, we've seen just a couple of these, and they generally do pretty well because they're essentially front drive Miatas. If you can't find a good Miata, and we've seen enough Miatas, we haven't seen enough of these. Bring an XR2. The judges probably won't even hassle you too much about it.
No, definitely wouldn't. Of all places to see a mint Mercury Capri, also Royal Oak, Michigan, probably at the very tip top of that expectation.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's the kind of place where somebody, really bought in and has lived the life to this day. Hey, speaking it's the caddy that sucks.
Yeah, speaking of captive imports, so to speak, or rebadged imports, this is the worst Cadillac of the last 30 years, the Catera. Man alive, what a piece of shit. It just is an Opel something. I don't know. Someone in the comments will know.
Yeah.
3-liter overhead cam V6 with a multitude of problems, automatic only, while they were trying to, market the car as a competitor to BMW 3 Series. I haven't seen one on the road in I don't know how long, and all of the ones I've seen have looked like this, where they've obviously been sitting somewhere neglected and dusty for 10 years.
Yeah, we were talking about Lemons Opals, and we were thinking about, well, what Opals, when did Opal stop being sold here? And then but then you started to have stuff like this. So it was it would pop up and well, it's not really an Opal, but it is. It's just, in Cadillac's defense, their idea was sound. Hey, we want a 3 Series competitor. We have GM of Europe. They have a car, and we can just. The problem with GM of Europe, it's the GM of Europe, and what you get back is something that's not that great. So, I will point out, boy, this Juan Lemons team in Denver. They're kind of in my doghouse because they tried to pull a fast one on us by saying, well, we're going to build a Miata with a Cadillac Catera motor in it. And we were like, yeah, we probably, the judges probably won't go too hard on it. What they actually did was the car that replaced this in the market segment was the Cadillac CTS. And I guess the early CTSs, the base models, had a version of this or the V6 that came in this Opel V6, something. So in their minds, the CTS then is just a Catera. And the motor they used was the 300 horsepower direct injection 4-cam V6, which, has its own issues, but for Lemons is that in a Miata is that's totally not in the spirit of what we're trying to do here. And then they thought they would get away with it by telling us it was a Catera motor. So you're not going to get that kind of stuff past us. We're Catera experts.
That's right. Man, going back to the Opel point, the Opel, nobody in Germany is cross-shopping an Opel Calibra and a 5 Series BMW. That was not a thing that was happening. So then just taking that Calibra, or maybe it was something else, I don't know, but slapping Cadillac badges on it and then expecting that to happen here, not a great strategy.
Yeah, I do feel sorry for Cadillac a little bit in that, they have just their brand identity has they've been fighting themselves for 50 years. From the point that they were the standard of the world, then they kept catering to this very loyal group of buyers that was getting older and older and older and older. And, all of a sudden you look and 30 years we've been catering to 80-year-olds, and nobody who's like younger than that has any interest. They're all buying BMWs. And so then they tried to fix it like, overnight by importing this and saying like, oh, we're cool like BMW. But by then, like the Cadillac brand didn't have the cachet. It was a big mess. So, and the fact that the cars didn't work probably didn't help the situation. So.
Yeah. Not great. Yeah. Also using that same Opel V6, in case you're ever wondering, is another car we've never seen in Lemons, which is the Saturn L300. So,
right. Also an Opel at heart.
Also an Opel.
Yeah. There's an L300 wagon if you really want cool points.
Yeah. Storage, man.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of 300s, I believe this is an XG 300 or similar.
Yeah, I don't think you could ever look at one of these and know what the three numbers at the end would be by default. So yeah, we'll call it 300.
There's something about Hyundai's, early Hyundais, and certainly some Chinese marks where the default of the design approach was to basically like, okay, we're taking a generic Japanese sedan, but then we're going to make it look upscale by putting on our bad copy of like an 80s Mercedes grill.
Yeah.
And the net effect is just something that looks like a real cheap knockoff of what you don't know, but you know that it's not really real. And nobody was ever fooled looking at this thing and thinking like, oh, hey, wow, that's like a Mercedes. It was more like, I don't know what that is, but it seems like a knockoff that's not going to work. And so I'm just going to go buy an Accord, even though it doesn't look arguably as fancy.
Yeah. You nailed it. That's everything. That's the entire thought process around this car from both sides. So, yep. Slam dunk. This one's on some Walmart alloys. Also.
Yeah. Great choice for a Lemons car, though. We haven't actually talked about this recently, but Judge Phil for a long time has just been on a really strong medium old Korean car kick. So if you can get a Korean car from about 95 to 2005, you'll make Judge Phil's day in racing Lemons.
100%.
Yeah. All right. Last car for the week.
Ooh. Yeah, that's good. I think that's a late 50s, early 60s Chrysler product of some sort. Maybe Polara or something. I don't know. I don't know much about these. I assume it had a V8 of some sort or a slant 6 option. Maybe slant 6 came later. But I mean, the really crucial things to note here are it's got the really thin B pillar. It's got the huge arched C pillar with the gigantic glass and the killer fins with the round taillights and the round bumper protuberances. Whatever it is, put any motor in it and bring it to Lemons. Doesn't matter what it is. That's a slam dunk. Everything like this looks amazing on a road racing track.
Yep, I agree. I cheated and read the comments. It's a 1960 Dodge Dart Seneca. But yeah, we said it before that sort of late 50s, early 60s Chrysler stuff was way weirder and cooler than Ford and Chevy. This is no exception. Actually, if anything, this is a little bit more restrained than some of the stuff. I mean, it's got a weird ass dashboard and like crazy details everywhere. I would say run it. Also, looking in the caption or the comments rather, Panama Car Spotting, one of our regular posters, he's actually commenting on this and says, does Ohio not have junk car laws? You can just leave hantavirus vehicles sitting anywhere. And I think the answer to that is yes, or
pretty much.
No. No, they do not have laws. Yes, you can leave hantavirus wherever you like. That's the Ohio state motto.
Certainly in rural parts of it. Couple cool things to point out in this car. It might have a push button transmission. This is about the right time for that. And then one of the really cool details I love about these is you open that the door, and the door has opening like under the windshield. Like it's like this weird recess for the door pocket that is super cool.
I think I can totally picture what you're talking about. And I think that's a byproduct of the extreme curve on the windshield. Like the windshield comes around so far that you need car underneath it and not door. Yeah. So it's, if anything, it's an extension of car more than it is a cutout of door, but 601. One of those weird details that stands out on these things for sure.
Yeah. Super cool. Might have a 413, I guess, probably right around that era where the big block started.
Well, and you can soup those up, as you know, from hot rodding songs and whatnot. All right. I've got the hooptiest. It's an R107 that's returning to the earth. It's got to be the caddy that sucks. Yeah. I mean, it's clearly been abandoned forever. And how is it abandoned for that long before somebody finally said, you know what, to hell with this? Probably the property that it was on got sold, and the new owner was like, okay, first things first. Yep. Calling up Jimmy's tow service and getting rid of that horrible Catera. So, that's the hooptiest.
Yeah. And I mean, that is honestly a great way to get a Lemons car anymore. People liquidating a property they've just purchased. They will basically get rid of a car that they didn't pay for, and therefore they don't care what it costs to get rid of it. So if you show up and say, I will take that from you, voila, you have a Lemons car. I've got the Lemons build, and surprisingly enough, we have had a Catera in Lemons, and it did okay. One IOE, and I think maybe Class C even, but definitely a car that is always welcome in Lemons, probably celebrated even. But I got to go with, man, that's a tough one, because I really do want to see the Breeze touring car. Let's just go with that. We'll go with the Breeze touring car. And I'll tell you why. I was
going to say, I hope it's that, because that's what I want.
Yeah, I mean, for all of the things about Chrysler, the Stratus was sold with the V6. I think there was even an RT package. You could buy it with a stick. I think the Breeze had nothing. There was nothing exciting about this car. There was no stick. There was no V6, I don't think, or maybe it was only V6, but we all know the V6 was a terrible engine, relatively speaking. There was no performance package, obviously all of the Stratus stuff will fit on it if you can find the 4 pieces of Stratus tuning apparatus. They exist still. But yeah, I mean, turn this thing, even if it's paint, turn it into Breeze with big, long, drawn out letters and wing lines. I mean,
man,
amazing.
So good. Well, if you're not building your Breeze touring car the next week, keep finding weird cars and post them, and we'll talk about them on this show. We'll be back next week, hopefully with more Breezes, but man, sooner rather than later, we want to see one of these at a Lemons track for sure.
Yeah,
man. We knock General Motors a lot for like being what are cool Californians talking about, and it's a bunch of stuffed shirts in like midwinter Detroit in 1994. And this is what they came up with. Like, well, it's got to have a cool font where it says Breeze.
Cursive. We need cursive.